Hey traders, welcome back to Valareso Capital. On today's video, we're gonna go through the market update and we're also gonna take a look at the weekly watch list. Remember guys that the purpose of this video is to create a high probability roadmap going into next week. That way we can focus on the best opportunities in the market. Also guys, remember that this video is for informational purposes only, is based just on my personal opinion and is not financial advice. And if at any point of this video guys you find any value, remember to subscribe to the channel. That really helps the channel to continue to grow and to reach more traders. So let's start here with the chart of the SPX, and I want to go back to what was the thesis that we were creating last week. So remember guys that last week we were talking about the possibility of the SPX making a new all-time high. And the pattern continues to be the same, because if you take a look at last week's price action, we basically just traded sideways. And usually this chop tends to be pretty challenging to trade when you're looking at what's happening with the stocks. Now, if we take a look at what actually happened with the SPX, it's pretty straightforward. Remember guys that we were talking about the anchor VWAP anchor from the gap up that we had in price. And remember guys that we mentioned about the importance of this anchor VWAP acting as support, which I think is actually pretty important. So you can see right here how the SPX respected the anchor VWAP. And this is one of the reasons that I tend to find the anchor VWAP way more important than the moving averages, right? The moving averages are basically, as the name says, they're basically just calculating the average of the prices of the closing prices, depending on what type of moving average you're using, right? Right here in my charts, I have the 5-day moving average and I have the 20-day moving average. So I'm using actually the simple moving averages because I'm starting to look at moving averages more kind of a not a place to buy, but kind of a roadmap to follow. So when moving averages are rising, you're basically just saying the average price is rising. That's kind of the way that I tend to see moving averages. And then a more of a level of interest, I'm looking at the anchor VWAP. So if you're using the 5-daily moving average here, you're gonna be like, oh, we're below the 5-daily moving average, but you're actually holding the VWAP. So that I do think that the anchor VWAP is gonna be more important, because that's the actual price pay. In terms of average, that's the average price paid from an anchor point, and you're gonna be looking at price, volume, and time. So I think it's really important. So that's kind of what I use the anchor VWAP, and this is a perfect example of why it's very important. So going back into the charts, this is a beautiful cup and handle. You can call it whatever you want, but the important thing is that we continue to hold this level. And as long as we continue to hold this level, which right now is somewhere around 5,600, I do think that the SPX is getting ready for a new all-time high next week. And as we are going into September, I do think that we have a window going into the expiration, the monthly expiration of September, which is going to be on the 3rd Friday. So I do think that we have a really nice window for some strength in the SPX, and I'm actually looking for some upper targets here. So if you can see right here in the SPX, if we happen to break out, the first target of course is going to be 5,700. We do have a Fibonacci extension measured from this high right here to this low right here. So that's going to be kind of the short-term target, which is going to be somewhere around a 50-point move. Now, if you take a look at the next Fibonacci extension, which is going to be measured from this entire base, then the 1272 is going to be somewhere around 5,800. I do think that there's a really high probability of the SPX reaching 5,800 before the monthly expiration of September. I do think that we have the pattern, and we have also, if you take a look at seasonality in September tends to be bearish, but when you actually look at the seasonality of September, when we have an election year, September tends to be more flat to bullish. So I do think that that's important to take into consideration, and the pattern is there, right? And I think that this is a really easy pattern. If we happen to close below this level right here, which is going to be 5,550, then perhaps that bullish thesis is not going to be valid anymore. But for now, this is looking pretty amazing, and this is one of the setups that I'm looking at, and I'm actually trading this with the SPXL. So let's take a look at the Qs, right? If we jump right here into the Qs. The Qs are looking awesome. Now, I do not expect, perhaps we're gonna test these highs right here, but what I'm expecting for the Qs is the same thing that I was expecting last week, and it's basically for a close of this gap right here. So let me just make this a little bit bigger here. So if you take a look at what is happening in the Qs, we actually had a really nice shakeout, right? The SPX traded sideways while the Qs actually did had a pullback here, but we are holding the anchor VWAP from the most recent swing low, and I do think that's a really important level. Now, what is going to be the target for the Qs? I'm looking at least for a test of the gap that we had somewhere around 490. And if we happen to break above this, I do think that there's a really nice possibility of closing this gap somewhere around 495. I do think that the SPY is a better trade, but the Qs are looking pretty awesome. You can see right here that also my indicator found support at the midline, which is pretty bullish. But of course, my main focus is going to be the anchor VWAP, and we are starting to break above the anchor VWAP from this swing high. So that's pretty bullish. And now let's take a look at the IWM, which is also one of my favorite setups going into next week. And that's going to be this flag right here. So the IWM is looking pretty bullish. We had basically an entire recovery of this pullback that we had, and you can see right here that we are starting to form this really nice tight flag right here in the IWM. You can see how the price is starting to compress, and usually after a compression we tend to see an expansion. So that's kind of a pretty normal path that price action takes. And this is awesome, all right? And if you use the anchor VWAP again from this swing low right here, you can see how we have been respecting it, and that's gonna be the level that I'm watching. Right now, we do have a close above the previous swing high anchor VWAP, and that suggests that buyers supported the pullback and are also supporting the breakout. So I do think that this is looking pretty amazing. I am looking for a retest of these highs right here at somewhere around 228, and I do have a position in the TNA as well, and this is one of my favorite setups going into next week. So overall, the market is looking pretty bullish. Even if we take a look at the UVXY, which is the proxy for the VIX futures, and you know guys that I prefer to look at the UVXY because it tends to give us a more reliable pattern than the VIX. That has been my experience, and I do think that we are having a really nice pattern right here. So you can see right here that we are testing this bottom, but we made a lower high. So this is actually a pretty bearish setup going into next week for the UVXY, in which you make this low and then you make a lower high. And usually what you get with this is a really nice break to the downside. So that's what I'm looking in the UVXY, and usually if we tend to see that strong move to the downside in the VIX futures, then most likely we're gonna have a really nice move in the SPX to the upside. So for now, the patterns suggest that we're gonna see a really nice rally in the market overall. Now the question is, what are the setups that we should put our focus on? And of course, as I mentioned, the SPY is my favorite setup. I already have a position here in the SPXL. The IWM is also one of my favorite setups. I already have a position with the TNA, and let me just show you really quickly how I'm managing these positions. The position in the SPXL, which is the proxy for the SPY, this is a 3x leverage ETF, which is the way that I tend to trade these names. It's basically the same, right? I started my position actually on this day right here, so I've been holding for a while, but you can see right here that we are on the green. I'm almost at 1 multiple of my risk since I placed my stop at 145.44. You can see right here that we are almost at that 1 multiple. I usually tend to sell half of my position at that 1 multiple of my risk, and then I usually let it run to a possible two multiples of my risk, basically a possible 2R target. So that's what I'm looking for in the SPXL. And if we take a look at the TNA, I started my position on Friday. My average is 43.13. So you can see right here that I started my position as close to that anchor VWAP as possible, which is always my go-to setup, right? So pretty interesting stuff. It's pretty easy. My strategy is pretty straightforward. I do have a stop at 40.80, and my first multiple is going to be 45.46. That's when I usually take half of my profits, and then I allow this to go for that second multiple while I manage my risk and I continue to raise my stop. So in terms of setups, SPY, IWM, gonna be my favorite ones. I also have a position in the TSM, so let me show you that one really quickly as well. Really nice setup, right? You can see right here that we had kind of this cup and handle, kind of a cheat entry, because we haven't reached that all-time high, but this is forming really nicely. You can see right here that we had kind of this pattern, which is shaping really nicely as a handle. So that one looks pretty awesome. And I'm looking for higher prices, right? One multiple is gonna be here. Perhaps we're gonna go for that second multiple, looking pretty awesome. The Qs, we already talked about the Qs. Meta is looking fine as well. Let me check what else. I do think that the semis are shaping pretty nicely, so I want to show you kind of the setups that I'm going to be watching to start positions as well. SMH is something that I don't have a position yet. I do have a position in TSM, but the SMH is looking awesome. You can see right here the flag. We are holding this anchor VWAP. We are holding the moving averages as well, so looking pretty awesome. You can see right here how tight, and this is actually pretty interesting, right? Let me just explain this before we end the video so that we don't make it pretty long. But when you're looking for a setup, right, when you're looking for a flag and you anchor the VWAP from the swing high, when that VWAP follows price really closely, that means, if let's use logic here for 1 second. If price is pulling back, right, and you see the anchor VWAP, which is the average price, also pulling back with price, what does it mean? It means that buyers are actually buying the pullback, right? Because otherwise the anchor VWAP will just be up here. That will mean that they're not buying the pullback. But if the anchor VWAP is going really closely with price, that means that buyers are actually buying that pullback, and that means that a breakout tends to be way more stronger when you have that pattern. So that's actually a very important tool to have for your system. So SMH looking awesome, and then the last setup that I'm going to show you is going to be Spotify. I really like this one, and of course you can take a picture of the names that I'm going to be watching, but these are going to be my main focus. It's going to be Spotify and also the SMH. That's going to be my main focus. I want to get heavy on the semis. They're looking pretty nice, and also Spotify is looking pretty cool here. You can see right here that we are holding the anchor VWAP from this hammer candle that we had on this day right here. Pretty important that we're holding that level, and you can see the support here, right? You can see the hammer candles at that anchor VWAP, and you can see the same thing, right? The anchor VWAP from the swing high getting pretty tightly, with that anchor VWAP from the lows, and that means that buyers are actually taking an opportunity of this pullback, which increases the likelihood that we're gonna have a really nice breakout. So that's gonna be it for the video, guys. I hope that you find a lot of value on this information. Remember again to subscribe to the channel. That helps me a lot, and of course it will help other traders to find value on this information. So that will be it. Have an amazing long weekend, and I will see you next week. Take care and bye bye.